Don't worry if you're thinking, oh great, another miniatures painting show-off video. This is probably going to be the last one of these for quite a while. The reason for that I will show you at the end of this video, but meanwhile allow me to show you my dwarves. So these first two dwarves, I'm not exactly sure where they came from. I think I must have seen them on the shelf at a game slash toy slash hobby shop somewhere. I thought they looked cool and decided to pick them up. They might be Reaper Bones miniatures, I'm not exactly sure. And they are stylistically a bit different from my other 5 dwarves. They are definitely thicker and stouter and a little bit less human proportioned. More what I would think of as a dwarf proportion, I suppose. They are done mostly with Citadel Contrast paints, except for the metallics and anything that needs to be a solid, non-opaque color. The contrast paints are translucent paints, so you can't really paint over top of other paint with them. I went the darkest brown contrast paint for this fellow's beard. I think it was Wildwood, I believe is the paint pigment. And I wasn't sure how it would look, but I like the wildness of his dark beard. I think it looks pretty cool. And I do like his beer mug emblem on his shield there. I think that's pretty fun. So we'll look at the other 5 here. Speaking of beer mugs, here's a fellow who has to have his beer with him while he goes into battle. Perhaps that's how he lost an eye. It's by operating sharp weapons one-handed, single-handedly. Again, mainly contrast paints for the colored pigments. They do have quite a bit of silver for their armored coats and whatnot. Their hammers I did more in a stone gray with metal strips around them. Again, the stone gray was a contrast paint. I tell you, using the contrast paints, it just feels like I'm cheating. It's just so easy. For instance, look at the effect you can get on this fellow's pants here. With just a single coat of paint, you get the dark portion of the pigment going into the recesses and the lighter part of it staying on the surface. With the axe blades here, I tried doing a technique in the sharpened part of the axe that I had seen a professional painter do on YouTube. It was an attempt to reflect light. I tried to do it on both axe blades. So I mixed some silver with some blue, light blue, with some white, and tried to highlight just a part of the axe as if there was light shining on the sharpened blade. But it ended up being, well, it ended up standing out way too much and looking unnatural, so I had to go over top of it with another coat of silver, which actually kind of fixed the problem. It left it a much more subtle difference in coloring. Here's another fellow with an axe that I tried to do the same thing again. And again, I had to go over top with another coat of silver to hide the really drastic change of the blue-white. But again, a single coat of contrast paint for his cloak gives a real nice, bold effect. Did you know that when you type the word dwarves, it's all done with your left hand? D-W-A-R-V-E-S. That's right. As I was preparing to make this video, I decided to type in the word dwarves and realized, hey, I only need one hand for that. Oh, so these 5 I had purchased from the Board Game Geek store some time ago, a year or 2 ago. They were meant to be upgrades for a game, but I wasn't interested in the game. I just saw 5 plastic dwarves and thought, I can't think of a single board game that wouldn't be enhanced with plastic dwarves. So I picked them up and held on to them until such time as I could find to paint them. And so I was trying to figure out what game it was for the purpose of this video and couldn't find it. It was no longer in the Board Game Geek store. And a bit of Googling later, it turns out they come from a game called The Dwarves, funnily enough. Now what was kind of weird about that is these particular dwarves are a second sculpt for that game. The original sculpt for the game actually looked much like my previous two dwarves in terms of being more squat, thick, and cartoony, whereas these are more human proportions. So they took very similar sculpts and just kind of stretched them out a bit by the looks of it. Now, I tried basing again for the second time, and I have to say, I'm much more pleased with how my bases turned out for these particular dwarves. With my previous figures, I just kind of scattered basing material around, and they looked just pretty rough and random. This one I tried to be a little bit more choosy about how I put the materials on, and I went very heavy with the little stones in particular, being dwarves working in the stone. I figured there'd be a lot of small stones around. So I'm really quite happy with how the bases for these figures worked out. Yeah, it's definitely made me more interested in continuing to try basing as I do my figures here. So anyways, those are my 7 dwarves. And what's better than regular old dwarves? Why, steampunk dwarves, of course. These are next on my list of figures to paint. However, as you can see, these 5 dwarves come in a lot of little wee pieces that I have just managed to clip off of the sprues, and I've had to keep them organized by number, by piece number, in order to be able to follow the instructions to assemble them properly again. I'm not exactly sure how to go about this. I've never really assembled figures from a kit before, so what I would normally do at this point, after I trim off the sprue attachments and mold lines and whatnot, is give them a wash, prime them, and get right to painting. However, if I try to prime these things, I'm going to end up having paint on the connecting points of each of the pieces, which isn't ideal. It's not going to lead to the best hold with the paint, and if I try to cover up each of the connecting points, it's going to be a real pain in the buttocks to attempt to do that. So I'll probably just end up spraying them with a coat of primer and not necessarily worrying about that aspect. However, then I have to figure out, well, how am I going to hold these tiny little pieces to paint them? And I've seen some other painters on YouTube who will drill a little hole and then glue a toothpick onto the piece to hold it. I might have to end up doing that in order to avoid having to hold on to the pieces, but this is all new territory to me. It's going to take me quite a long time, I imagine, to both paint and assemble this small army of 5 dwarves, and then I'm going to have to find another similar army to put together in order to match up against them to actually play the game. So that's the next challenge in my painting evolution, and of course I'll be sure to check back again once that's finally completed, whenever that happens to be. I want to give a special thank you to Joanna, my Patreon supporter, and I hope that you too will consider supporting me on Patreon so that I continue to buy paints and cool little figures to put together. Thank you so much. Hey, it's Josh. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you could consider doing one of the following things, I would appreciate it. Give me a thumb up, subscribe to my channel. If you've already subscribed, hit that notification bell, or share the link to the video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Don't worry if you're thinking, oh, this is another universe. The reason for that is something I will show you at the end of this video, but not necessarily, and I hope that you too would